Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Halper from ICAD, speaking to you from Jerusalem for my February 2026 update on where we are in the struggle over Palestine, in the struggle for Palestinian liberation, and a post-colonial, I would hope, one democratic state resolution, um, and trying to put the updates of this month within that kind of a framework. I just want to go back and, in a paragraph, re-emphasize that the idea of settler colonialism, how important that is as a conceptual framework for us. We can't continue to use the dominant paradigm, which is conflict, an Arab-Israeli conflict. We can't use that language because it traps us and the Palestinians into a win-lose equation. It legitimizes Israel as a side. It legitimizes Zionism. It legitimizes the colonization of Palestine. Uh, and at the same time, it delegitimizes, it reduces the Palestinians to merely a side that now have to negotiate what are really their inalienable rights as an indigenous population with complete rights to their country. So that the conflict paradigm then creates these two artificial sides. It creates a false symmetry. It forces Palestinians to negotiate and compromise over issues, rights that they have that they should not even have to discuss. And it allows then the most damaging part of this, which is the ability to frame the conflict as one of security and terrorism, where you have a normal state of Israel facing a terrorist population, a terrorist people that are the Palestinians. We have to completely, we have to get away from that kind of a framing completely because we're often complicit in it. We use the term conflict. Even the Palestinians use the term conflict. And so, again, and I've said this many times in my updates, we have to move to an anti-colonial paradigm, an anti-colonial language we use. Because if we use the term settler colonialism, it's not a conflict anymore. It's rather a process of a settler colonial population, which were the Zionists, today Israel, invading another people's country with the purpose of taking it over, and in our case, Judaizing Palestine. And Judaization is a very important term. This is the essence of Zionism. Well, you're not going to get the concept of Judaization coming out of a conflict idea. So that so that you know Judaization is the process, and then it moves into a second stage, which is pacification, and then the final stage, the triumph of settler colonialism, which is normalization. So if we adopt a settler colonial framework, first of all, we're breaking the idea of sides. There are no sides. There's simply one colonial power, and you can't legitimize colonialism. That has to be defeated in its attempt to Judaize Palestine. And there's a Palestinian people with inalienable rights to their own country that have a right to resist. And now resistance comes into play because you capture the logic of the anti-colonial struggle if you adopt the settler colonial paradigm. It isn't terrorism. Conflict enables Israel to present themselves again as normal, fighting against terrorists. The settler colonial paradigm destroys all of that and allows us to bring out the logic of settler colonialism, which is, again, Judaization, pacification, normalization, and the erasure of a Palestinian people that can never be legitimized or legalized in any sense. And that's why it's so important we begin to adopt this paradigm on our website, the ICAD website, which is a wonderful source of resources, analysis. You could read a lot of what I've written about settler colonialism in Palestine. Of course, I have my latest book, which is called Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine. That's the title of the book. But other people have written also about settler colonialism. It's a very important, it has to be the framework in which we do all our discussions of Palestine, because in that way we're able to effectively reframe the discussion. So the question then becomes, where are we in this process of settler colonialism and in the struggle for Palestinian liberation and the reconstruction of a post-colonial entity, um, polity, and a society? And that's the question I'll come back to. But it's in that framework that the updates then make sense. Because an update is simply an update. Okay, so this happened and that happened and so on. But what does it all mean? Where does it all fit in the process of settler colonialism? And what are its implications? And so I want to begin with the updates, but again, I'm going to come back to this wider settler colonial framework. So there's been some very dramatic developments in the last week, even not only the last month, really dramatic in terms of moving Israel's settler colonial project forward to its final stage of normalization. First of all, in Gaza, of course, the Security Council, back in October, but the process is continuing, approved Trump's so-called Board of Peace over Gaza. Another colonial layer has been laid over Palestine, especially over Gaza at this stage, um, um, that is now being implemented. And Gaza is really being alienated from the Palestinians. It's being taken over basically by Trumpian real estate interests. Uh, Even though this Board of Peace is ironically supported by the PA and even Hamas and the Arab states and the UN and Israel. So if you get Israel, Hamas, the Arab states all supporting the same thing, there's got to be something weird going on, right? And what it is really is really a colonial attempt on the part of Trump and the United States with the uh, with the submission of the UN, because the Board of Peace was passed, approved by the Security Council again in October. Even China and Russia didn't oppose it. They abstained in the Security Council vote. Uh, but the bullying of Trump, um, and his ability to bribe, especially the Arab countries, uh, has been really crucial in terms of his success in imposing his own plans on countries, including Palestine. Uh, so, in this Gaza Board of Peace, just to for a minute show how it works, Trump is the CEO. I mean, it's a business model. It's part of the transactional, you know, art of the deal of Trump. So he's the CEO for life. So the idea is this Board of Peace, according to the UN, would be a temporary body tasked with implementing the Gaza peace plan through phase one, phase two, and phase three. But Trump is the CEO for life with absolute veto power over everybody else involved in this, including the Palestinians. So his conception of the Board of Peace is not a temporary one related to the phases of the Gaza peace plan, but really a permanent rule of Trump and his organization over Gaza. It's a new kind of colonization. It's kind of a corporate, an actual corporate colonization of another country approved by the United Nations. Now, just reflect on that for a minute. Now, under Trump, in a personal way, running this, it's not even built into some kind of organization or UN sort of a plan that hides the controls of Trump. Trump is up front. It's his show. He's the CEO of Gaza. And under him, then there's a an executive board, the Board of Peace Executive Board. 22 countries have joined, mainly brutal autocratic countries, from Azerbaijan to even the Arab countries, a lot of some of the Arab countries. Indonesia is a part of it. The crazy guy in Argentina is a part of it. No normal democracy, let's say, or semi-normal democracy has joined. In other words, of the 193 countries in the world, of the 62, the Trump invited. In other words, the Board of Peace you have to be invited onto it by Trump. And after 3 years, it's going to cost you $1 billion for your country to continue to be on the Board of Peace. Of the 62 countries invited, only 22 actually joined. And these are 22, if you look it up on in Wikipedia, they're pretty brutal countries that have joined. Israel has joined, of course, but the PA was never, I mean, the PA itself is a collaborationist regime with Israel. So it's another layer of colonialism that the Oslo process imposed over Palestine. But even the PA itself, as some kind of recognized representative of the Palestinians, they weren't even invited. They're not even a part of this in any way, partly at Israel's insistence, but partly because they're not at the table. They're not players, the Palestinians in general. When the Gaza peace plan was announced in October at the White House, if we remember, it was Trump and Netanyahu standing in the White House, introducing the Gaza peace plan to the world. There was no Palestinian representative. And even though this was an Israeli-Hamas agreement, so-called, Hamas obviously was not represented. So the Palestinians are not a part, and but the indigenous have never been a part of colonial projects of taking over their countries. Then there's the executive board of this Board of Peace. And, who are they? Marco Rubio, Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, Tony Blair, and Mark Rowan. Who's he? A Jewish billionaire real estate guy and a Trump supporter. He gave $1 million to Trump's campaign. He's running Gaza. The president of the World Bank, a fellow named Robert Gabriel, if you ever heard that name, he's a Fox News producer, and he's on Stephen Miller's staff. So he's one of the major figures governing Gaza now. And then there's an executive board for Gaza itself, which is 11 people, and that includes an Israeli real estate developer is on the board that is the executive board running the affairs of Gaza. And then below, and there's no Palestinians obviously represented whatsoever. And then there's the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, which are 15 Palestinian technocrats, as they're called, that are not affiliated with the Palestinian Authority. So even when the Palestinians come in as doing the everyday kind of dirty work of administering Gaza without any power whatsoever, even they're not a part of the Palestinian Authority. And in fact, even though we're in this phase 2 of the Gaza peace plan, Israel has not let the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza into Gaza to begin their work. So Israel really continues to control Gaza. Israel, even though the Rafah border has been opened, Israel has its own gate, and Israel has been given the authority, apparently by Trump or by the Board of Peace, to determine who comes into Gaza and who leaves Gaza. Israel still controls 53% of Gaza through what's called the Yellow Line, which divides Gaza in half. But Israel has complete military freedom of action, despite the so-called ceasefire. It's continuing to kill Palestinians, and it's continuing to destroy neighborhoods, extensive urban areas beyond the so-called Yellow Line. But of course, the whole of the 53% that Israel controls has absolutely been destroyed. So that in this whole framework, Israel, in fact, keeps its control of Gaza, certainly its security control, its military freedom of action, and its ability to determine In what ways will Gaza be developed? How much humanitarian aid can come in, and who can leave, and who is barred from leaving or returning to Gaza? So Israel still has control all of this. So that's the peace plan. We're in phase two now of the peace plan, and that involves, let me just say, four elements that are really important, and they're important to understand not technically, but for what they mean in terms of the colonial project of Zionism over Palestine. The first part of phase two that we're beginning to enter into is to disarm Hamas. So Hamas is already seen as a terrorist organization that's illegitimate. In other words, we have to understand the background of October 7th, of the attack, of Hamas. Israel is succeeding because of this conflict model and because of words and terms like terrorism and so on. It's able to present this again as a legitimate fight of a normal country against a terrorist entity. The Palestinian rights are completely ignored. And so and so the background, obviously, of October 7th and of the whole struggle of Palestinians, I would say since 1936, with their revolt against the British, and maybe going back to the 1920s, when there were already mini revolts happening in Palestine against Jewish immigration because they understood where Zionism was going. Uh, the Palestinians have been engaged all these years in an anti-colonial struggle, right? And so Hamas has to be seen, I think, whether you agree with the program, whatever violations of human rights they committed, not to say that Israel and the United States have not committed, violations of human rights and so on, whatever violations, nonetheless, Hamas is a resistance organization. It's a political organization. It's resistance. And so the whole idea then that it's a terrorist organization that can have no role in the governance of Gaza, that it should be disarmed. What does it mean to disarm a resistance? Now, it makes sense to disarm a terrorist group, but to disarm a resistance organization that's fighting for its rights against colonialism? No. And now you're beginning to see the importance of the language, of the concepts behind it that are being used. International law gives colonized people and oppressed peoples in general the right to resist, including armed resistance. Now, that has to be within the framework of international law. You cannot, as Hamas did, attack and kill civilians. You can't do that, and Israel can't do that. And of course, Israel's killed probably in the end more than 100,000 civilians in Gaza. The number today is like 70,000, but a lot has to be discovered, including Israel's use of what are called thermobaric bombs, which are bombs that create such a heat that they vaporize bodies. So in the Palestinian count, I'm saying this by the way, but it's really tragic and important to understand. Um, there are thousands of bodies that aren't accountable for, that have disappeared. They've been vaporized, literally, by these thermobaric bombs, right? And so the death count will never really be known. But the point is that you can't, uh, condemn Hamas as a terrorist organization and disarm it and disconnect it from the political struggle that it's involved with as a Palestinian resistance group, and then allow Israel, not to mention the United States and most other countries, from committing even worse violations of human rights and international law, but to retain somehow their legitimacy. There's a double standard here. So the idea of disarming Hamas is more than simply disarming Hamas. It's disarming a resistance group, and in that way, serving Israel's purposes of really defeating the Palestinian struggle against Zionist colonialism. And there's another part of disarming. They want to disarm it ideologically as well, to deny any liberation or anti-colonial representation of Hamas. So, so under Plan B of this is phase 2 of the Gaza peace plan, the idea is that Gaza, and I'm quoting, Gaza will be a de-radicalized. What does de-radicalized mean? It means accepting Israel and in some ways accepting Israeli security control at a minimum. That's de-radicalization. It's a complete negation of the very legitimacy of Palestinian liberation, of their struggle for liberation. So Gaza will be, and I'm quoting, a de-radicalized, terror-free zone. Gaza is defined, the future of Gaza is defined as a terror-free zone, meaning that the whole Palestinian struggle for liberation has been reduced to an anti-terrorist fight in which, of course, Israel then becomes the hero because Israel is on the front line, as it always says, in the fight against terrorism. So Gaza, to complete the quote, will be a de-radicalized, terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. Well, again, what does that mean if we interpret those words in the context of an anti-colonial Palestinian struggle? It completely delegitimizes and actually disarms and dismembers that liberation kind of a group, and it hands Gaza over both, or it hands Palestine over, not just Gaza, because this is applied to the West Bank eventually as well. That's phase 3. It hands Palestine over to Israel, and it allows then the Trumpian real estate people to then develop Gaza for their own economic reasons I'll talk about in 1 second. A second part of the Gaza, of this phase 2 of the Gaza peace plan, is a temporary international stabilization force, a peacekeeping force. Indonesia has just agreed to put 8,000 of its own soldiers into Gaza. So again, it's really a military occupation, again, of Gaza. In this sense, I mean, Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world, so they're participating. In other words, I would say um, Muslim supporters of Palestinians should mount their own campaigns against the Muslim and Arab states, but the Muslim world in its support of the colonization of Palestine. This could not happen if the Muslim countries that are cooperating. Kazakhstan just joined the Abraham Accords. Azerbaijan is going to join. Uh, if the Muslim countries would not cooperate, this kind of colonization, the colonization of Palestine could not go on. A third part of the Gaza peace plan is this transitional governance of these Palestinian technocrats that run the daily life. And the fourth phase, that I want to just talk about for a second, really emphasizes the colonization, the taking away of Palestine from the Palestinians. And that's the reconstruction of Palestine. And here we get into Kushner's 1984 type um, um, plan to rebuild Gaza. And I just want to uh, uh, show you what this plan looks like quickly. This is the plan, the official plan that is going to be put into place unless something else radically happens. There are no counter plans of Jared Kushner and his real estate developers, almost all of which are Jewish, his company plus this other guy, the Israeli real estate guy and the Trump real estate guy that are on the board of the so-called Board of Peace. And here's the reconstruction of Palestine. Palestinians have no voice in it. The 2 million or more population of Gaza has no say in what's going to be done. There's nothing Palestinian here. They're completely cut out, and it's built, as you can see, on two principles. One is a tourist site in which Trump and his allies, including I think the Arab governments will profit tremendously. This reconstruction plan is going to cost $70 billion. All right, who's going to make the money? Where are the profits going to go? And I'm telling you, they're going to go to the Trump organization. They're going to go to Arab and European real estate people, and they're going to go to Israel because a lot of the materials that are going to go into this are going to be taken from Israel, purchased from Israel. And Israel, there was an article in Haaretz not long ago, is already planning how to profit from all of this. So this is all colonization for profit. And as you can see, it's mainly the seaboard that's developed. In other words, the Palestinians are really banned from from their own coastal. I mean, fishing is one of the major industries in Palestine. That would be eliminated because it's not a fishing port. It's a port that's going to be built mainly for tourist ships and, of course, for cargo maybe as well. But the whole coastline is tourist sites. And you can see the second principle is control, really Israeli control, because Israel has always said, and this is actually a kind of an unspoken part of the Gaza peace plan, that it will retain military security control and military freedom of action uh, forever. Regardless of peace plans or whatever. And so, as you can see, Gaza is divided into these kinds of blocks. These are basically, as you can see here, blocks of hotel chains. I mean, this is the picture. It's called Project Sunrise. I mean, even the term has nothing to do with the Middle East, with Arabs, with Palestinians, or whatever. And you can see the whole seafront here is all tourist. Well, where are the Palestinians in this? The Palestinians are in the back of Gaza, kind of pushed onto the border with Israel, and there'll be a buffer zone where they live, controlled by the Israeli army, and they've given up or they've been removed from the whole coastal part of Gaza. And these blocks, as you see, are built in a way that the Israeli army has easy access. That's the reason for these spaces in between. They're not to be built upon, really, but they give easy access to the Israeli military. So this is the plan of reconstruction of Gaza that's going on. So I know this is going on for a little bit long, but still, we have to really understand what's happening. And so the second part of my update, and I'll try to be as brief as I can, is the West Bank, of course. In all of this, everybody's focusing on Gaza. And Gaza should be focused on, and especially the plight of the Palestinians who continue to starve, who continue to be killed. Big parts of Gaza are still being demolished by the Israeli military, but we've lost track of the more important part politically, which is the West Bank. Um, I'll just give you one example. Sometimes our own activities in support of Palestinians are disconnected from political processes. Now there's a whole campaign, which is there's a mobilization to send another humanitarian convoy to Gaza of about 50 boats to Gaza. You know, it's my problem with it is, to be perfectly honest, is two things. First of all, it's humanitarian, and humanitarian deflects from the political aspect of Gaza. This isn't a humanitarian crisis; it's a political crisis that uses humanitarian oppression in order to impose a certain political order. I went on the first boats into Gaza in 2008 in the Gaza flotilla, and we made it clear that we're there to break the siege. This is political. We did not bring humanitarian aid because we didn't want this to be seen as a humanitarian mission that would deflect from the political. So there's a problem here, but the bigger problem is Is this really the priority? Sending humanitarian boats to Gaza that we know aren't going to get into Gaza. Is this given everything we've said about what's happening now in Gaza, aren't there other more focused kinds of campaigns we can develop to deal with the colonization of Gaza rather than sending another flotilla? We're not really connected to what's actually happening. And the same is true of the West Bank, because it's great to send a flotilla to Gaza, but what's happening in the West Bank is much more urgent. And few people are talking about it. There's very little resistance in terms of what's happening in the West Bank. And what's happening really quickly is two things. One is there's a pacification campaign to break Palestinian resistance completely. They started that in Gaza, and now it's moved to the West Bank. The Israeli government talks about the Gazification of the West Bank. It's a pacification campaign of the Israeli military, first in the north part of the West Bank, where about 40,000 Palestinians have been displaced from their homes and have been demolished in the major refugee camps of the West Bank, Tulkarm, Nablus, Jenin, and other communities like Tubas. So there's a pacification campaign, a mini Gaza campaign going on in the north of the West Bank, and it's moving south now to Bethlehem, and in the last couple of weeks into Hebron itself, where there's been an actual military operation. Area C, which is 62% of the West Bank, where the settlements are, of course, is being ethnically cleansed. The Israeli army has unleashed violent settlers to drive Palestinians out of their communities. 50 Palestinian shepherd and farming communities have been abandoned in the last few months. 50. And it's not only the communities that are driven out, but it's all the hundreds of acres of land, grazing land, that they use that's then grabbed by the settlers. In the last few months, there have been 40 new settler outposts established where these Palestinian communities had been in order to take the land. And just this week, 3 days ago, basically the West Bank was annexed to Israel, and the Palestinian Authority was virtually closed, right? Because the Israeli cabinet made a decision that it is going to uh, uh, open the West Bank basically as a real estate market for settlers. In other words, in the West Bank, Israel is forbidden to extend its legal, it's by the 14th Convention, to extend its legal system into an occupied territory. So in order to get around that, to do de facto annexation, it uses its civil administration, which is its military government, in order to rule, to create a corpus of law that are actually military orders over the West Bank. It was done by the Israeli cabinet so that the decisions are secret. We don't really know everything that went into this annexation, but we know certain things. We know that for the first time, and this is against international law, settlers are going to be allowed to buy land directly. This has all been controlled by the Israeli government before, by the civil administration. Now settlers will be able to buy land, and all the oversight of the Israeli government through the civil administration over land registration, whether land transactions are legal or not, whether there's forgeries, whether there's coercion, all that is removed. And now it's completely the Israeli government that can also take over land, and the settlers can purchase lands, which means these vulnerable Palestinian communities or landowners, their land can be expropriated because not some of the land is owned communally, not by individuals, but by villages and so on. And other owners can be coerced obviously by the army and the settlers, to selling their land without any. It's really opening up the Palestinians to a mafia type takeover where they're going to lose their lands through this so-called open market. Israel is also taking over areas A and B that we have to understand, which are under Palestinian control. They're taking over the ability to plan an A and B under the guise of protecting archaeological sites, water resources, the environment, and so on. Israel has now taken authority really over A and B, and it's taken authority over the Hebron and Bethlehem municipalities as well. So this is a huge thing. It is based not only the end of the two-state solution that never was, of course, but it really is the completion of the pacification of Gaza, now completion of the pacification of the West Bank, and the ethnic cleansing of the West Bank, leading to basically confining Palestinians to small little pockets in the West Bank. And this leads us to, of course, the normalization of Israeli apartheid. And here I just want to show you once again how this works. This was the process of Judaization that we know about. The conquest of the West of what became Israel itself in 48, of the West Bank in 67. Again, this with Area A, B, and Gaza, the idea of a Palestinian Bantustan. But now we're in another situation in which Israel will expand. And this is an official map of the civil administration, of the Ministry of Defense, through the civil administration of where Israel is going, what this annexation decision this week means. It means that Israel will take over about 90% of the West Bank, if not a little bit more, actually. In other words, Israel itself takes over about 90% of Palestine, right? Maybe even a little bit more than that. And the Palestinians are reduced to these little enclaves, plus the backyards of Gaza that we talked about, on between, let's say, 8, 9, 10% of Palestine. So this is apartheid, exactly equivalent to South Africa. In South Africa, the white South Africa was 89% of South Africa, and the black majority in South Africa, the black African majority, was confined to 11 Bantustans on 10 Bantustans, I think, on 11% of South African land. Here you get the same thing. You're going to have the Jews of Israel controlling 90 plus percent of Palestine. That will be Judaized, and that will be Israel, and that will be normalized in the Abraham Accords that are coming down the pipeline. And the Palestinian Bantustan will be these disconnected enclaves on 8 or 9% of Palestine. So it's very similar in that sense to South Africa. And that's really where we are today. So to complete this, and I know it's gone longer than I wanted to, the Trump plan that was presented in 2020 basically already has approved where we are today. This all is conformity to Trump's plan of normalization, in which any Palestinian entity will have no territorial contiguity, it'll have no sovereignty, it'll have no economic viability, and of course, the refugees will never be able to return to Palestine. This would be a Palestinian state because the world demands a Palestinian state. So normalization gets into what I call the good enough solution. In other words, they'll present this kind of a map. Actually, there won't even be a map. There'll be the Abraham Accords. They'll normalize with Israel, which means in the Trump plan, Israel plus its settlements, plus its control of West Bank territory. And then they'll normalize a Palestinian state on the 8 or 9% that remains. And who's going to ask? If you think about it, think of your neighbors, think of your Congress people, think of your members of parliament. Is anybody going to ask, wait a minute, is this Palestinian state viable? Is it really sovereign? Does it have control of its borders? Is there any economy? Nobody's going to ask. Nobody reads the fine print. For our governments, they're going to say two-state solution. Great. It's wonderful. Normalization is a good thing. The Arab governments have finally normalized relations with Israel. It's over. In other words, this is the greatest threat, normalization, to the Palestinians since 1948, since the Nakba, because there is no political space after normalization. Normalization is normalization. It's normal. It's normal. There's nothing after normal. So when the Palestinians come and say, well, wait a minute, this is not, certainly not liberation, the liberation of Palestine. This isn't even a two-state solution. This is cruel apartheid, worse than South Africa. What about our rights? The answer is going to be, sorry, the conflict is over. It's been resolved. Everything's been normalized, right? And we've all moved on. We're moving on to Sudan. We're moving on to Ukraine again, maybe to other issues. And sorry, but it's too late for you. And that's really the danger of the Palestinians face today. Settler colonialism has an end, and the end is coming soon. So where are we? And I'm going to finish on this. In terms of the whole settler colonial process, you can see it goes there's a pattern to settler colonialism. It invades and settles the country, in this case, the Zionists in Palestine. Its goal is to Judaize Palestine, to transform Palestine into a Jewish country, the flip side of which, of course, is de-Arabization, the de-Arabization of Palestine. And we're seeing that, and we're certainly seeing that in Gaza today. Then you get into the stage, like I said, of pacification, the final suppression of all resistance. And then you move into the end game of Zionism, which is normalization, apartheid, and we're on the cusp of that with the Abraham Accords. Now, now it doesn't happen, doesn't have to happen that way. That's the ideal. And that, in fact, is the process that we've seen carrying out, but there is resistance for the last century and more of Palestinians. And that resistance has managed to slow Zionism. They haven't been able, certainly, to erase the Palestinian presence in the country. The Palestinians are still half the population, even after the expulsions of 1948. There's a very strong Palestinian culture here, a strong Palestinian life. Palestinians are smooth. They hang on to their lands and their rights in a steadfast kind of a way. And there's a whole worldwide movement that supports the Palestinians. So this is far from over. The resistance of the Palestinians, and you can see, and the initial invasion of Palestine was met by foundational resistance in the early days. And then after the Arab Revolt of 1936, and certainly after the Nakba, the resistance became more nationalistic, more ideological, with plans, more organized sort of resistance going into the PLO, right? And including resistance to occupation. Now we're in a stage of pacification. So our answer, our meaning Palestinians and all of us that support Palestinian rights, has to be summoning power. We have to mobilize all the resources the Palestinians have at their disposal for their liberation, which means their own people all over the world, which means people like me, anti-colonial Israelis. And there are others in Israel that support the Palestinian struggle. And of course, all of you, the millions around the world that have come out for Palestine, we have to better organize. We have to have a political program. We have to have a strategy. And of course, this all has to be led by Palestinians. We have to summon the power in order to face and defeat the Zionist colonial venture. We have to push back against pacification, obviously, and normalization. One of the key priorities, and I'm saying the boats going into Gaza, it's a good initiative, but it doesn't really fit the political agenda. What does fit the political agenda? If we were really following the political processes that I've mentioned, what fits it is a campaign. This is maybe the most urgent thing we could do, a campaign against normalizing Israeli apartheid. Because that's the big picture. That's what all these updates, of course, figure into. And that's what's really important. In the meantime, there's other campaigns that we should be doing, especially in the West Bank, that we're not. This should be a campaign to protect Palestinian communities. All of you should be coming on solidarity visits to Palestine. It isn't enough to support the Palestinians from afar. They need you here. There should be a campaign to dismantle these settler outposts, not only fight the settler violence that's cleansing the West Bank, but to go after the sources that are these outposts, to go after the settlers in international campaigns. There should be a campaign, to monitor this Gaza peace plan. We shouldn't just allow this to happen and comment. We should be monitoring it. And there should be an effort led by Palestinians, of course, to establish an international coordinating campaign on Palestine so we have that organization and coordination that we need. So there's a lot to say. I've talked for an hour. Normally, I'd apologize for that, but I'm not going to because, these issues are complex. We have to have the analysis. We have to have the understanding if we want to get into a political program that's relevant. We have to, address the Palestinian needs for liberation. That has to be built in. And we have to organize and we have to coordinate and have strategies of how do we fight back against Zionist settler colonialism in an urgent way. There's an urgency here that I don't really see in our movement very much. A lot of Palestinian society itself has been NGOified. A lot of our actions take place disconnected, as I said, from political events. We keep doing BDS, we keep doing whatever we're doing, whatever our projects are, and lobbying and education and encampments and protests, all of which are good. We should keep doing them, but there's got to be more than that. And we have to be addressing what's actually happening politically on the ground in an urgent kind of a way. And that's why we need, to tell you the truth, I mean, there are webinars. I'm certainly not the only voice. But when I do get a chance, I try to limit my updates to 20 minutes. I don't always succeed. Today, I just went crazy. But I still think it's a coherent and really important update for February 2026. So forgive me, understand me, and I'll see you all next month. Bye.